Hello, everyone. Guten Abend from Germany. Good evening. My name is David Patrician, and it's a great pleasure to lead our discussion today about the upcoming U.S. elections in a few days on November 5th. Just briefly about myself, I'm originally from the United States, and I had a Fulbright journalism grant to come over to Germany a few years ago, and I'm working now for German media. And I was lucky enough to win the Amerigo Media Award in 2022. And that really brings our guests together too. We have three distinguished guests with us today. And I'm going to give a brief digital introduction to all three of them. Two of them are here already with us, and the third one will be joining us in a few minutes. So let me just give even though we're in our own offices or rooms, just a quick introduction. Starting off, we have Jana Ciglerová. Am I saying that correctly, Jana? Ciglerová?
Yes, you are.
Wonderful. She was a 2019 Amerigo winner. Congratulations. She's currently based in Miami. She's been in journalism for almost 30 years, working mostly as a newsprint reporter, having worked as an American correspondent for the leading Czech national daily, Deník for 7 years. And she also wrote for several publications, including The Observer and Evening Standard. She's interested in women's issues and founded the discussion program, The Stroke of a Woman. In addition, she published a book, American Diary, about the United States, and holds an Open Society Award for Interview of the Year. In 2020, she won the Journalist of the Year Award for the OSF Foundation. Please help me welcome digitally, Jana Ciglerová.
Hello, thank you for the warm
I try to bring some atmosphere even though we're in front of our computers. Thank you, Jana.
Thank you.
Our next distinguished guest, truly an honor, Hannelore Veit. She was the 2023 Amerigo winner, and she's based in Vienna. Hannelore has an MA in American Studies from Notre Dame. She was there on a Fulbright scholarship. Always good to see fellow Fulbrighters. She worked as a Far East correspondent in Tokyo, and in addition, she was the bureau chief in Washington for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation, where she covered both President Obama and Trump. And I'm guessing those were two completely different experiences.
Totally different.
Totally different. We'll get to that in a moment. She has just recently written a book about Trump voters, not Trump himself, but about Trump voters and his supporters. In German, it's called Wer hat Angst von Donald Trump? In English, Who is Afraid of Donald Trump? It is a pleasure to welcome Hannelore Veit.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And welcome, everybody.
And our third guest is Shona Murray. And I'm actually going to wait when she logs on, and when she joins our conversation, then I'll give a brief introduction about herself. So I'll put this to the side. And I think I'd like to just begin maybe with Hannelore. Hannelore, for your book, you mentioned you interviewed many Trump voters. And you said that there's, of course, a great range of people there, but there's also basically a different US perspective that's very different than the European perspective. Could you tell us a few things about that?
I think the European perspective, basically, I came back from the States in 2021, and ever since I've been asked the question, what's happening? What's wrong with Americans? How is it possible that Donald Trump is back? Are they all crazy? And I thought, well, I'll start there, because 50% of Americans are not crazy. That's not possible. You know, we have the core supporters, Donald Trump's core supporters. They may not think a lot why they vote for, why they stand, why they support Donald Trump, but there are some very intelligent, highly educated people who know why they vote for Donald Trump, and these are the voters that interested me. So I spent a lot of time during the primaries in the States and talking to these people. And yes, it's a different perspective, because here in Europe, we basically get the liberal media. We do not see the other media that Americans get, because I see media totally polarized. It's either pro-Trump or anti-Trump. What we read, we quote the New York Times. The New York Times has a readership of what, 10 million people? That's not very much compared to 340 who are, 340 Americans, basically. And that's the one side of the news we get. So Fox News, Newsmax, whatever is on the right side, we don't really have that reflected on this side of the Atlantic. And also, I think we cannot take our European mindset. We are socialized differently. And take that and say, okay, same is true for America. It's just not. It's different. The people there grow up differently. I mean, I personally, having spent a lot of time on both sides of the Atlantic, I see advantages on both outlooks, both mindsets, both ways of looking at the world. But I think it's wrong to just think that we have the one and only way of looking at things.
Very good. And now when we talk about the two perspectives, of course, Jana, you are currently now based in Miami. If I'm not mistaken, Florida has 30 electoral college votes. The last two elections, Florida has voted Republican. First, before we get into the general election, how's it looking for Florida? I know it's tough to make predictions, but is it going one way or the other in your opinion?
So it's actually not that tough to make predictions when it comes to Florida because the atmosphere and the polls are pretty distinct here. It looks like it's going to be Trump all the way. There's just a little detail that could maybe sway it, and that is the abortion that is on the ballot, and the question whether it stays in, whether the women in Florida will have the right to get an abortion. Now it's very short time, 6 weeks, and anywhere this this topic was on a ballot, the Republicans lost. And even like in conservative states, Republican states like Kentucky, let's say. But Florida seems to be the first one where it's going to be on the ballot. It may turn for keeping the right to abortion, but it may not be enough to make Democrats win. And so this will become an anomaly when it comes to the voting. But all in all, when I arrived in Florida 7 years ago, it was a purple state still. It was not clear what's going to happen. And especially because of the Latino population around big cities, it was at least these parts would always turn it Democratic. Well, what happened was that Ron DeSantis succeeded in turning Latinos red, and succeeded in a red wave here. And for the past elections, 2 elections, it came solidly red. And there used to be a saying that if you cannot win the presidential elections unless you win Florida, well, Donald Trump proved this wrong because he won Florida in 2020 and lost the elections, which he not admitted yet, though.
So let me ask you, I'm based here in Germany. And of course, I mean, everyone, when they see me as an American journalist, they always are asking the last 3, 4, 5 months about the US elections. How is the mood? Of course, you're living in Miami, it's one area. But in general, from what you're seeing in the United States, are people really nervous about this? Are they also worried? And I'd ask this to both of you, to Hannelore and to Jana. We had, of course, a few years ago, January 6th, the storming of the US Capitol. The United States has many good things, but one of the things that I would say argues a little bit negative, over 400 million guns in the country. Is there truly a fear now that, let's say, if Donald Trump loses the election, that he and many of his supporters will not accept the results? Jana, I'll start with you.
So I'm going to be I'm going to be in Mar-a-Lago or at Mar-a-Lago during the final day. And we were discussing really deeply the security measures that I should take if in case it's going to be landslide and Donald Trump will lose on the night of the elections. It's not a likely scenario, but you need to be prepared for everything. And of course, the fear is on their side because A, they have proved they can get pretty violent if they don't agree with something, and B, they are the ones who are way more likely to have and carry and possess guns. So yes, there is a certain nervosity around that, but at the same time, the big difference is that Donald Trump is not in charge, and so there's less protection for them than there was in 2021. And also the most aggressive people from that crowd, from those times, be it the organizers or the everyday soldiers that went there to Capitol, they're in prison. So
for the time being.
And it's also a message. So So there's less fear around this, but there is, because there is this saying, when Democrats lose, they get sad. When Republicans lose, they get mad.
Oh, wow. I haven't heard that before. Okay, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Hannelore, how about your experience? I know you're based in Vienna, but you've been often to the United States the past few months and years. How about your take about the acceptance of the election results? And by the way, it seems from my observation, when Republicans win the elections, whether it's in the Congress or the president, there's no problems with election fraud or any kind of complaints. It's only when they don't win that we have these kinds of allegations, which is also very one-sided. Hannelore, please.
Well, part of an essential part of democracy is accepting that you have lost the election, which Donald Trump hasn't done so far. What I just spent a few weeks now, mostly on the West Coast and mostly in Democrat voting states like Washington State, California, Colorado, and most recently in Massachusetts. And there I feel a certain, angst, fear, because one of the topics in this election campaign the past few weeks has been democracy. What's going to happen to democracy? Is America sliding towards an autocracy? And you feel that kind of fear, people talking about that only among one half of the country. The other half of the country doesn't see it like that at all. And I asked them a lot of questions. I also asked, what's happening? Democracy. Oh, yeah, but talking about Republican voters now. Yes, but look what really happened. We have a president. The president is Biden, whether rightly or wrongly, but it's sort of accepted what happened January 6th. And also, it's ridiculous that America will ever become an autocracy, because we are based on a country based on democracy, a country founded by people who left Europe, who left the regimes in Europe and build a new country here. So what they also say is, and I think this is very important when you listen to Republican voters. Don't take Donald Trump literally. He says a lot of things. Just take him seriously, but not literally. That's one sentence that's been around ever since 2015 or 2016 during the first campaign, Trump's first campaign, and they really believe that. And what I have heard a lot is, oh yeah, he says a lot. He's a New Yorker. New Yorkers exaggerate. Come on, don't take everything seriously. It's not meant like this. This seems to be the attitude and the spirit among Republican voters. A lot of them say, I do not like his personality, but I like what he stands for. And then, what the first things they talk about is the economy. It's the economy, stupid. And that's still true today.
Yeah, very good. For anyone that's just joining, I saw a few people have joined us in the last minute or two. We're still waiting for our last speaker, Shona Murray. But for those that have just joined us again, welcome. Our organization, of course, ENAM, European Network of American Alumni Associations. And those are programs that the U.S. State Department has funded. And we're very happy to have our guests here today. We are all Amerigo journalist winners, including myself and Hannelore Veit and Jana Ciglerová. I want to say that right here. We're discussing about the elections, and of course, we want to welcome you also to enter your questions in the Q&A. And we already have our first question from the audience. I'd like to read that to the both of you. The first question is, how could the outcome of the U.S. presidential election influence future U.S. foreign policy towards Europe, particularly in areas like NATO, trade, and energy security? And I would throw in the Ukraine war as well. Would anyone like to start, please?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I thought you were going to start. No.
Good. I'm going to say, Hannelore, you can start, and then Jana.
Okay.
Sorry.
And Shona's joining us. Hello, Shona.
Confusing you. Oh, Shona is arriving. Yes. Basically, I think it will. With Donald Trump, there's one thing we just don't know. He has said so many things over and over again in three different directions, talking about one and the same thing. He is unpredictable, and he's using this unpredictability in practically every aspect of his policy, especially in foreign policy. He has said Ukraine. He has said, the war will be over in one day if I'm president. He has said, okay, I'll see what's if I need to pump a lot of money into Ukraine, and if nothing happens, then maybe I'll pull out. He has said a lot of things about NATO that he'll pull out. I don't think he will, by the way, but he is one defining character trait, if you want, is unpredictability. And he will always see himself as a deal maker. So he will say, I can make a deal with Putin. Nobody else can make a deal with Putin, but I will be able to do that. Now, for Europe, I think we should really be prepared for a second Trump presidency. I got one really good answer from a European diplomat. I asked him, is Europe afraid of Donald Trump? And his answer was, well, apparently Europe is not afraid enough, because after 4 years of Trump, Europe hasn't found its voice. We're still not speaking with one voice. And I would think that's one way we should really go. We should try to put all these little differences we have aside and really think about what keeps us together, what unifies us.
Good points. Good points. Thank you. Jana, would you like to add to that, please?
And sorry for the interruption, Hannelore, at the beginning. I just
Sorry,
it was a little confusing, so I just wanted to make
That's
sure.
all fine. No problem. No problem whatsoever.
Okay. So I spoke to the voters just as Hannelore, I'm sure she did, and I was more on the east side. So I spoke to Georgia. I went to Georgia, North Carolina, and I've been to Republican voters, and I know that I've heard from them how they think about the war in Ukraine, and they just don't care. And they actually think that it's a distant country that has no consequences for them whatsoever. It's 5,000 miles from them. They should accepted the talking points of Marjorie Taylor Greene and this branch in Republican Party, that it's just too much spending. We're spending, or they, Americans, I'm not an American, we're spending too much on other people's border that's got nothing to do with us, and we should rather protect our border before the invasion that is going here. And I'm quoting them. And this is like the general feeling among them. And Donald Trump is one of the people that supports this view, that says that gave them the idea of the reaction. So I also saw firsthand the difference among general American public when Hamas invaded or brutally attacked Israel last October. And, another distant war, a distant conflict, but it was, Americans were captivated and still are by this conflict. And you could see the different reactions. So if there was not much attention to Ukraine before that, there was zero after that. And like Zelensky would disappear from the political scene. I mean, I'm over exaggerating a little bit, but, just to get my point across. Yeah. So I think there may be some real consequences for Europe, because Donald Trump is not going to want to fight with Putin. And he suggested that his idea of peace is that Ukraine basically gives up the territories that Russia has invaded. Which means for us, Europeans, we translate this very clearly because we have been, unlike the Americans, through a war ourselves. My grandmother, we've shared the wisdom in generations. So we know that a strong Russia is not good for Europe and not good. A country that does not respect other countries' borders is not good to be strengthened. And of course, this victory is going to strengthen Russia a lot. So I personally am pretty much afraid of that. And Czech Republic, there's just one little country between us and Ukraine. We have felt the war and the consequences of the conflict of Russian invasion pretty lively in the Czech Republic. And I know we're not the only ones in Europe. And I can imagine it will get much worse should Putin win this war.
Yeah, okay, no,
What is
very
it?
sobering.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
put in a sentence there, because
Please.
that is a very interesting experience, because of course the Czech Republic, you know what it is. Austria has sort of always had like a little protected position in between too, and here you don't have the feeling that people are afraid of what's happening over there. We're also not a NATO member, which is I think in times like these, we should at least have a discussion about joining NATO like other countries did, and they joined NATO pretty fast. But in Austria, there seems to be this feeling that we are isolated from all this, which is a little weird, to be honest.
Good
And
point,
one
Steph.
more to add, just one thing, and then I
One
would
last
like
point.
to
Go ahead,
speak
go ahead.
Shona, and we had lived under Russian or Soviet invasion, right? So we know what it's like to be forced to learn Russian and you know, all that, like to be not occupied, but ruled by Soviet Union. So we remember, and I remember myself, and of course there are a little older people who remember that because they lived through it.
Yeah, excellent points. Thank you both. Let me see if we can have Shona here. Shona, can you hear us okay? Hold on, you're on mute. If you can turn off the mute for a second. See if that works.
There, here we go. Is that it?
Ah, yes, we hear you. Hi,
Great.
okay.
Listen, I'm really sorry about that. Had
Quite
a
all
last
right.
minute train to catch. So anyway, and it was delayed. So here
No
I am
problem.
though,
You made
and
it.
thanks a million. I'm very glad to be here.
The miracles of
So
modern technology.
I know, I know, it's amazing.
Where are you
right?
physically right now?
I'm actually in London. I just took the Eurostar from Brussels because I had a last minute thing tonight, and then the train was late, which is never normally is for the Eurostar. So
Oh. The
so
Deutsche Bahn, the Deutsche Bahn is always late.
I'm perched at St. Pancras train station now.
Yeah, okay. Well, we appreciate you joining us. I gave a brief introduction to our other two guests. I'd like to do the same for you.
Sure.
I'd like to ask you a question as well. So we have Shona Murray. She was also an Amerigo winner, journalist winner in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Congratulations. Shona holds a BA in journalism. And just so you know, Shona, the resumes were very impressive, so I had to shorten them down a little bit for all three of our guests, just so you know.
Okay, that's fine.
Shona holds a BA in journalism from the University of Cambridge, as well as a Master in Philosophy and International Peace Studies from Trinity College in Dublin. She's a European correspondent reporting on European affairs from the Brussels Bureau for Euronews, English language edition. She is also a political correspondent for the Irish Independent, monitoring the Brexit process. And back in 2016, she traveled across the United States, covering the presidential elections, and has reported for organizations such as Time, Radio France International, and the Sunday Business Post. It's a pleasure to welcome you, Shona.
Thank you, everybody.
And Shona, the question I have for you.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, the kickoff question I had to you. So you're based in Brussels right now. And of course, we know that they have the EU Commission hearings that are just starting up. So there's a lot of things going on with that. But from the EU side and the Brussels side, how are they, from the people you're talking with, looking towards the American elections? Is there a lot of trepidation, a lot of worry? What's the general feel there in Brussels?
Yeah, once again, you know, holding their breaths, bated breath. And I think not having learned the lessons of 2020, because it was so close in 2020. And so the EU felt at that stage, and this is before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, that the EU then needed to strengthen its own autonomy away from the United States because of somebody like Trump, who was hostile to the European Union, hostile to NATO. And they learned a lot about the fact that, I suppose, the question about the longevity of the transatlantic relationship, or how, you know, unreliable it can be, or at least patchy. And then they sort of fell into a false sense of security with Biden. Now, it's understandable in some ways, because everything was chaotic because of the full-scale invasion, and everybody had to work together. And the EU and Biden have worked incredibly well to mend ties and strengthen those ties. And I think it's also partly because Joe Biden himself is he's quite a Europhile, as is Anthony Blinken. So they did have the benefit of those particular characters. And you see the two sides working so well at the G7 with the announcement of $50 billion to Ukraine before the election. And now they feel, oh my God, this now we might be faced with another Trump presidency, and the sort of preparations were in short supply, and there seems to be emergency talks going on now to see what can happen. And it's, I mean, obviously, as we heard before, you know, security is key, because if Ukraine falls, the question around, okay, we know Trump probably won't leave NATO, but Article 5 is under threat, because we heard what he said around countries that aren't paying their 2% of GDP, and that's only, you know, in that context, even if let's say they all were paying the 2% or 2.5%, does that still mean he's going to intervene on the side of Lithuania? You know, if there's an attack from Russia. So there's the security aspect, but there's also the other aspect of what we heard in the last few weeks through the Draghi report, and how Europe is really falling behind China and the United States when it comes to innovation and, you know, penetrating innovation into market success. So you have this stress as well about Europe in decline. Europe is mortal. Europe could die a slow death. I mean, we're looking at this fatalistic language on top of then Trump saying he's going to apply high tariffs on his competitors, and he sees the EU as a competitor. So trepidation is probably an understatement.
Okay, thank you again for the sobering review on that. We appreciate it. Let me ask all three of you, and if I can, just for brief answers. Of course, Kamala Harris is our own candidate. She's not Joe Biden, but she's been the vice president under Joe Biden for the past few years. If you look at some of the success at the track record of Joe Biden, he's done an actually pretty good job. Some of the ones I just picked out. More Americans have health insurance than ever before. Green spending has increased. Renewable power is the #2 source of electricity in the United States. Increased spending in infrastructure projects. Stock market is doing fantastic. Violent crime has fallen. Unemployment levels at record lows, the lowest in 50 years. And the strengthening of the transatlantic relationship and international relations that, of course, were strained under 4 years under Donald Trump. So, of course, this doesn't affect everyone, but if you look at the general picture, it seems that Kamala Harris, while doing her own thing too, can ride on some of the success stories of Joe Biden. And yet it's still almost a 50-50 race. Can you maybe share with us your thoughts about why it is so close? And I'll start maybe with Jana, then we'll go to Shona, and then Hannelore, please.
Well, David, I would add one more thing, and that is inflation, that in the peak was February 22 was 9%, and now it's 2.4%, and there was no recession that the US was actually facing. So Joe Biden, it's the second time. First was 2008 with Barack Obama, when there was the whole world financial crisis. He was the vice president back then. It's the second time he's actually proved that he can get the economy from really bad state to a pretty good position, even comparing worldwide. But the thing is, Americans don't have the perspective comparing themselves to other countries, because they don't really travel that much. They don't know that much about other countries. They don't have to. They're a continent, right? So they don't even know how well they are off. They just know they're worse off than they were before the pandemics. And this is what they mentally compare it to. And they blame, at least the ones that are not voting for Kamala Harris, they blame them, and they blame her because she's part of Biden's administration. So they blame her for having a deep pocket and for not being able to afford things that they were able to afford before the pandemics.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Shona, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, and in particular, obviously the inflation piece, because that's actually all we're hearing about. And I think in Europe, people are recognizing that that is the key, you know, issue for Americans, and it's understandable, because of course it's the same thing in Europe, because we saw the European Parliament elections in June, which saw the rise of the far right, and across all European countries, Italy, Hungary, even in Austria. So I think there's a recognition around that, but I think also people also look to Joe Biden as a bit more like would have moved to the left in comparison to someone like Barack Obama, when he tried to, for example, deal with student loans, affordable health care. You know, his position on Roe versus Wade, although he didn't codify it, was strong, even though he has renounced abortion himself. So I think that is it. And also from a European perspective, his unlimited, untrammeled support for Netanyahu is something that, you know, gets mixed reaction in Europe. But let's say in countries like Ireland, which I know very well, obviously people are heavily disappointed that he has that he's not doing anything for people starving in northern Gaza and so on. So I think that will go down pretty badly in terms of his legacy in parts of Europe. But let's say if you're looking at his relationship with Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission, it couldn't be better. It couldn't be better. And I think that people will definitely miss that part. But because I think that Europeans can recognize what he's done from a sort of left-wing perspective as it been more socialized America. So people would see that they could relate to him a lot more. And again, the Europhile issue really helps.
Excellent. And Hannelore, we'll have you have an answer. And then after that, we have a few questions from our audience again. Please go ahead.
Okay. Basically, I totally agree with what you said about inflation. It's a subjective feeling of everything. My hamburger costs so much more now. Gas is so expensive, $4 a gallon, you know, nothing compared to Europe, but it's still in people's minds. And the key question for every campaign, I think, is that gets asked is, do you feel better off now than 4 years ago? And most people would now answer no, because everything is so expensive. So that's one part of it. Kamala Harris, yes, when she as vice president, she was practically non-existent. The media didn't talk about her. There was nothing that stuck out. Okay, the role of the vice president is a little bit just wait and see if what happens to the president, and there's no other really specific role. She also had her area that she dealt with was, or she was supposed to deal with, was the southern border, which of course is a problem that you cannot solve, and it's not easy to deal with this. But I personally was surprised by her popularity curve going up like really steep after her nomination. But since she hasn't had much time, that's true, but there is nothing really tangible. Her program, what does she stand for? I think a lot of people have problems with what really is her program, what are the issues she stands for, apart from abortion. Of course, that's the one thing that definitely works in her favor. But she also said, will she just continue what Biden has been doing? And have the Democrats really been selling what has been happening in the past 4 years? Have they been able to sell that to the voters? I don't think so, I personally, but that is definitely a question. Yeah, how can she's as a person, who is she? Then she says again, but I will not continue Biden's line. So what does she stand for? I think a lot of people have trouble trying to understand her and grasp what she stands for.
Yeah, excellent. Or also the flip-flopping on the fracking issue, where she was against it, and then Pennsylvania is a very important swing state, and all of a sudden she's seems to be okay with it.
Of course, yes. Or also, you know, in her past, an issue that it's not an issue in the States, but it's an issue in Europe. It's death penalty, and she has changed her mind on that too. So there's a little bit of, uneasiness.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few questions from our audience. I would just suggest I'll read the question, and whoever would like to answer it first, go ahead. All three of you don't have to answer every question, but certainly if this is one that you're burning to answer, feel free to go ahead. The next question we have from our audience is, with global challenges like climate change and the rise of authoritarianism, how might the next US administration shape the country's role as a global leader? It's a big one. Would anyone like to take a shot?
Shona, would you like to answer?
Hold on.
Maybe just an observation.
Sorry,
I don't want to monopolize. Okay, here she is.
Oh yeah, so I mean, badly, you know, if it's Donald Trump, because we've seen that the rise of Donald Trump expectedly, and as was predicted in 2016, led to other authoritarians being emboldened in Europe. You see it under Viktor Orban, who has outwardly said he wants Donald Trump to win, which is fair enough, he's entitled to do that, but has withheld things like the European Peace Facility on Ukraine and is blocking things in the Council, waiting to see what the response is going to be from Donald Trump, because he knows that the wind will be very much in his favor if Trump gets into power. He already has Robert Fico in Slovakia. He knows that Trump in NATO will probably do away with a lot of the Trump proofing that has been going on within NATO to try to protect Ukraine over the next few years. And then you hear him talking about Kim Jong-il, you know, how he respects this guy. North Korea has 10,000 troops on Ukrainian territory fighting for Russia. And then he, amongst things, is he said he's going to bring Putin and Zelensky to the table and end the war in 24 hours. And as we know, Ukraine is very much on the back foot of that. And that'll, of course, embolden Vladimir Putin to know that he essentially will win the war. And then what's next? So it's, I mean, it's so dangerous from that perspective. And then we know his record of climate change is abysmal. Pulled America out of the Paris Climate Accords almost immediately. He calls it a hoax. Now, having said that, I don't know how much better Harris is going to be in defending the fight against global warming if she can't defend something as scientifically proven as dangerous as fracking. I mean, I get it in Pennsylvania, okay, that it's a big issue, but there are lots of people in Pennsylvania who don't like fracking. There are lots of people whose environment has been severely damaged, whose children's livelihoods, lifestyles have been damaged. I've heard lots of reports from people saying that, you know, their air quality and so on is impacted. So it's terrible that she can't defend something that is actually much better for the greater good, that she has to give into, you know, a push from ulterior motives. So, but still, I mean, that's only a small thing. I think if Donald Trump gets in, all the gloves are off in terms of the international rules-based system. It's already, I mean, as Josep Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, said a couple of weeks ago, that is an international law is essentially under the rubble in Gaza, because we know that it doesn't exist when it comes to the Israeli offensive there, which has gone way beyond a response to a terrible terrorist attack, but has now, as we've heard from the International Criminal Court, they're accused of extermination, starvation, plausible genocide. So, and of course that's happened under Joe Biden's presidency as well. But when you take Putin into that as well, it's so serious. It keeps me awake at night.
Wow, okay. Hannelore, you wanted to also say something to that?
Yes, basically talking about global challenge. I think that's again a thing of European mind, global challenge. I'm sorry, and environment and climate change. That's what I wanted to talk about. It's again a difference in mindset. I've heard a lot in talking to voters in the States. Europeans are obsessed with climate change. You hear that, of course, more from Republican voters than from Democrat voters. But there's definitely, if Donald Trump comes back, you know, we know that we'll go back to fossil energy and renewables. Yeah, they are also there, but you know, if it's good business, we will use them. There's a lot in the IRA, which I think is a misnomer, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot. There are a lot of incentives towards renewable energy, and I think Biden has done a lot in that direction, but still Americans don't see climate change as much as a threat as Europeans see it.
Okay. Jana, I wanted to ask you a question regarding the Trump supporters that you've been talking to. This time around, I've never seen it, even at the Democratic convention, where we had a lot of prominent Republicans, including Liz Cheney, going out and campaigning for Kamala Harris, former Republican generals saying that, you know, Donald Trump is really dangerous for the security and democracy of the United States. Has that had any impact with some of the supporters that you've been just talking to now in Georgia and other places?
Not really. Some, yes. One comes to mind who is somebody in the financial industry, and he said, I voted for Trump twice. I'm not going to vote for him. I voted for Trump, holding my nose and putting my, you know, my little cross there, but I'm not going it a third time, I'm not going to do it a third time because of January 6th. But then I would also say that Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, whoever they are like really on the fringe of the party. They are very few, and the rest of the Republicans, they just stick to Donald Trump. One answer I got when I talked to a Republican strategist, actually, I said, well, what about Liz Cheney? He said, Liz who? You know, meaning they've totally been pushed to the side and they don't speak for the Republican Party anymore.
Okay, how about you? Very good. Jana, how about you, being there in Florida and in Georgia?
So my experience is that when I go to, there's a difference when I go to polling places where you can get like a general voting person, and to the rallies. At the rallies, it's all MAGA. It's really those hardcore supporters that Donald Trump could do literally anything, and they would still be there, big fans, you know, dressed in red and white and blue, and with his portraits on wherever. But so for them, no, these are people who betrayed Donald Trump, but they're not worth a thought. But I've met several conservatives, like principled conservatives, who I would say people like Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, Barbara Bush, younger, the George W. Bush's daughter. These people are like a direction of that they still can vote, and they don't have to be afraid or ashamed to vote for a Democrat, because many of them will do it for the first time, very first time in their lives. And so I would say that you could meet a voter, a Republican voter. There will not be that many of them, maybe 10%. But that's just my guess. In front of a polling place, or in an individual interview. These tend to be more educated, a little bit better off than people that I meet at the MAGA rallies. And for them, it could be like helping hand in, I still can stand up for conservative values, and yet I don't have to be ashamed to vote Democrat. And there's one interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen the ad, but it was also it's Liz Cheney's message. You don't, and Michelle Obama's too, but Liz Cheney is the author of this. You don't have to be afraid to vote whatever you want, Republican women, and don't not care about your husband's opinion. And I would never think, you know, coming from Europe, we're pretty much, I mean, not equal, but, you know, somewhere close. I would never think that this could have any effect on the Republican women, and you would be surprised. It actually gives them another direction how to not have to vote for Donald Trump, and not give them the confidence to do so, and not the confidence, the guidance. Guidance was the word I was looking for.
Very good point. And let me ask three of you. Maybe I'll start with Shona. From what I've been reading, it seems like Trump has a lot more male support and Kamala Harris a lot more female support. So is there also kind of a feeling of the battle of the sexes here for this one? And of course, we have other issues too, such as wokeism and cultural sensitivity. What's your take on that, Shona?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it sort of the case that the women are going to swing this, and that was not the case in 2020 as well, you know? So women are on the ballot, and women's autonomy is on the ballot, and we saw the bellwether situation in Kansas, which was one of the first states that had a referendum on an outright abortion ban. Yeah. Kansas, a completely red state. I mean, you know, as Republican as you can get, and voted against it because white, rich, poor Republican women, you know, need to have abortions. There's been 2 cases in Texas this week alone where women were let die. Women miscarrying babies. One, a teenager, just still read about it today, and another woman, a mother of 2, who were miscarrying and sent home, and doctors said they couldn't treat the woman, even though the baby was not going to survive because there was a fetal heart. Exactly what happened to Savita Halappanavar in Ireland, which actually led to Ireland changing its abortion laws. But in Texas, where women, perfectly healthy women, the girl actually who was a teenager, just it was the day of her baby shower that she miscarried, and they're dying. These women are dying as a direct consequence of Roe versus Wade, of what Trump did, where Trump is saying on rallies, I'll protect women whether they like it or not. And so if that is your daughter, even if you are a consummate supporter of the Republican Party, you're going to think about her future. Or if it's your wife that you're worried about, that could happen. I mean, it's because these are situations that can't be planned. It's not like if you're living in Texas and you want to terminate a pregnancy, you can go to another state because it's planned. This is a situation of emergency where women are dying. And you would think that women are going to say, well, we can't have this. And actually, the other point that we were talking about earlier, the fact that there is an ad with Julie Roberts, and I know it's sort of tongue in cheek, don't tell your husband what you're voting. It's the only place where women have full private autonomy. It's a bit of a joke, but it's actually not really Like the fact that we're having those ads, it's kind of frightening. So, and I don't think enough has been said about actually women's voting. Maybe, you know, because a lot of people I'm hearing, you know, obviously I'm in Europe, and I found when I was covering the campaigns before, you don't know until you're at the rallies and you see the fervor there. But I wonder, are women just quietly going to vote for Kamala Harris, and they don't need to shout about it and hear from the likes of Tucker Carlson, and who, by the way, was supporting child punishment, corporal punishment at some rally as well, in a kind of a weird, sleazy way. So, like, you know, maybe those people are just go, look, I've had enough of this, you know, racism and bluster and nonsense. I'm just going to vote because I'm worried about the future of women's lives, women's health. It's extremely frightening. Women being allowed to die and doctors not being able to save their lives, even though the situation is terminal. You know, it's really quite shocking. There was another case of a doctor who was fined and arrested, fined $3,000 for terminating a pregnancy of a 10-year-old child. I mean, and this is, the chilling effect is upon us. It's happening. It's not just a chilling effect. It's, you know, it's been demonstrated with actual lives. And this is what Donald Trump is proud about.
You make an excellent point. And with all the important issues out there, some analysts have said that maybe it's the abortion issue. If Kamala Harris wins, that will be the deciding tipping factor. So very sobering news, but thank you for sharing that with us. Does anyone else want to talk on that subject before I get to my next audience question? Are we okay?
Maybe just add to that, because that's of course a question I have asked a lot of conservative women in the Republican states, in the flyover states, and the answer I got a lot was, oh yeah, but abortion is one issue, but it's a social issue. It has nothing to do with the reasons with what I want to see in a president. It should go back to the states. It was the correct way of dealing with it. It shouldn't be dealt with by the Supreme Court. But it's you know, a matter of what I would like to see in a president. The president has to take care of the economy. He or she has to make sure that my life is good, and national security has to be dealt with in a very decisive way. And that's what I vote for. And I don't vote for social issues. I'm just repeating what the answers I'm getting there. So how much would abortion be a decisive factor in this election? I don't know, but there's definitely a gender gap. You see it everywhere. Of course, more women tend to vote Democrat. Gender gap is especially big in the Black community, where you have Obama now going to appeal to young Black voters, because they tend to more to support Trump, with his macho appearance and everything. I'm not sure how much it will help at this stage of the campaign.
Yeah. Okay. We have about 10 to 50 minutes max left. I'd like to get to our next audience questions. Great discussion here. The next question we have, this is Andy. Oh, this is Andy DeWald. He's a friend of ours. He's with the German Fulbright Alumni, also the president of the German Fulbright Alumni. Thank you for joining us, Andy. He says, thank you for hosting this. Very interesting discussion. Would you agree that the election takes a new level in terms of open positioning of company CEOs? For example, seeing Jeff Bezos pulling back his newspapers from positioning themselves, Elon Musk giving out money, etc., and so many celebrities are also positioning themselves, like Taylor Swift, of course. Will this put more pressure on all other CEOs, celebrities, etc.? Thank you, and thank you for the question, Andy. Would anyone like to take a shot at that?
If I may, this is a very interesting question, because what it raises this year especially is, can you buy a presidency? And can you buy your position in the government? And it looks like you can, if you're rich enough. And we now know that Donald Trump is, even thanks to the elections, he's $2 billion in debt. It was a Wall Street Journal published this today, I think, or yesterday. So there is a great need for money on his side. It may be even a security issue when you have a president that is in such desperate need of money, and a lot of it. And the part that Elon Musk took in this election is unprecedented, and in many ways it's dangerous because it really elevates one specific person with very specific business interests. The only advantage this could have is that he needs his electric cars to be sold more. So maybe he will turn Donald Trump into like a more electric EV friendly president if he wins. But some of the things he's been doing, like granting $1 million to a registered voter that agrees with him on two issues like guns and free speech, that may be against the law even. So the fact that he's doing it in Pennsylvania, the most important of the swing states, and he's so far been doing it pretty effectively, is going to raise this question, or has already raised the question of whether you can buy a presidency. And regarding Jeff Bezos, I don't know if he just let the Washington Post people editorial board publish that endorsement, he would probably get he would have gotten way less attention to the topic than he got when he actually banned it and stepped in and censored the editorial board's decision.
Okay. And let's not forget also, when we're dealing with money, I mean, money's always been a big factor with US politics. I want to say that I recently read that in this election cycle, presidential election cycle, the cost of both campaigns together comes to around $16 billion, which is astronomical. And then I think it was back in 2010 where we had Citizens United, where basically the Supreme Court said that corporations, I want to say unlimited, but it's certainly within the millions, get put in there. So money has always played a big role, but Jana, I would agree with you. It's become almost so open and flagrant now. And I couldn't believe the fact that they said when Elon Musk was giving away $1 million to register, not to vote. But in the sense, it's a very gray area, and it's something that I think America definitely has to deal and discuss with. Excellent. Thank you, Andy, for the question, and good to see you, my friends. There, Sharon. Let us move on to our next question. This is from an anonymous attendee. The question says, it has been said that during times of European crisis, EU supporters should raise a smile because the EU is able to progress and find new strength only in times of true crisis. For example, the unity shown at the start of Putin's invasion. The question here is, could it be the case also this time? Wouldn't an isolated EU be forced to finally come together or risk failure? Oh, this sounds like a question made for Shona. You want to give that a shot? Anyone else then afterwards? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good question. It's really pertinent. And in fact, there is a discussion around that in Brussels at the moment that, some EU diplomats are saying, well, this may be the kick that Europe needs to really have its own strategic autonomy when it comes to defense and so on. But look, the threats that the world is facing at the moment are too grave for Europe to do it on its own now anyway, because it hasn't prepared. And it goes back to my earlier point that we had since 2016 in Europe to try to move away and be autonomous and failed. And this was after the invasion of Crimea, Georgia, Russian interference, and so on. So it's not like the writing wasn't on the wall anyway, but still we went ahead with Nord Stream 2 and then look, the rest of history. So yes, so it is a good point that the EU does need to, could potentially, survive on its own in theory, and this could be the kick, but it's not possible. There just isn't enough money in Europe or ability to give the weapons to Ukraine that it needs for it to survive, to even for it to not fall without the United States. And then, as I mentioned there, Article 5 in NATO is just so strategic for Europe's own defense. And then we're each other's largest trading partners. And obviously Donald Trump makes a huge, big deal about the trade surplus. So, and then we have a threat from China with Chinese subsidies and, as NATO has said, a decisive enabler of Russian war. So the EU just can't actually go it alone without this. I mean, it may have to, obviously, if Trump's around, but it will be so serious and potentially catastrophic and potentially difficult. But it is also at the same time, is it another, motivation to say eventually Europe will need to be stronger when it comes to its own defense policy and resuscitate its defense industry and so on. But it's just not right now. It's not ready.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the questions. I would say we're just about coming towards the end of our discussion. And of course, we didn't even have a chance to talk about the whole border crisis. For a lot of Trump supporters, maybe Hannelore, I'll ask the last question on that. They come and say that when you look at the numbers, under Donald Trump, there was an average of around 600,000 border crossings with Mexico now per year. Under Joe Biden, I think most people, even Democrats, would say that was a failed policy, up to 2 million per year for the first 3 years. Is that also, do you think, from the people that you spoke to, and of course, Jana spoke to a lot too, so that'll be the final question maybe. The border issue, is that going to be a big one for Trump?
Yeah,
That's the one, even during the debate, he always came back to.
It's going to be a big one for Trump. I mean, the Democrats also say there's a crisis at the border right now, and they are trying to come up with more restrictive policies. But it's definitely a topic that works for Trump, and he has linked immigration with crime, and that goes down well with his supporters. Whether it's true or not, statistics say no, it's not. But in their minds, he has managed to do that. And crime is up, it's going down again now, but yes, people are afraid, and people are also afraid of something they don't know. So there's a lot of insecurity there, and that works for Trump, definitely.
Yeah. Jana and Shona, any last things about the border, very, very briefly?
Just quickly, I was really surprised. I met people Midwest or, not from states that are not bordering that don't have any borders with Mexico or and other, any borders, just the sea and other American states. And yet the voters would tell me that immigration is a huge problem for them, and they consider that the second or the first most important issue that brings them to the elections, which is economy and immigration. And we know that these two topics, Donald Trump is the more vocal one, is the more associated with. People trust him. When you look at the polls, people trust him more on economy and more on immigration. So if immigration becomes or is the most important issue, then Donald Trump, it really helps him to win the elections. He knew that. That's why he stopped or blocked the law that was in the workings in the Senate, and that would help the situation on the border. But one has to admire that, or admire would not be the word, but somewhere this direction, that he has been able to implement this topic to people that it has nothing to do with, and they consider it something they're willing to fight for. And I think it goes deeper psychologically. People just don't like others or different, and from the areas where you experience less difference, you tend to fear it more than from areas where you see more diversity, more different people, more different aspects of people and life, and then you don't fear that as much. But that's just my psychological conclusion about how is that possible that people with no borders still fear the immigration as a big topic.
Excellent, thank you. Shona, last word, dealing with the border issue for Trump and Kamala Harris.
Sorry, yeah. So I just think my own concern about this is that obviously there is a crisis on the border. That's fine, but a lot of it is whipped up, and the disinformation and dehumanization of people is actually quite astonishing. And we use migrants, we don't use human. The child separation policy of Donald Trump, I thought, was one of the most obscene, cruel, unjustifiable, unforgivable policies I've ever read about. Taking children off their parents, where 7 children died in those prisons that they were put in, where you had the head of the Homeland Security arguing at a Senate committee that they weren't obliged to give these children toothbrushes or anything to clean themselves with. There were children in diapers in those facilities, not being looked after by their parents. It to me, unforgivable, and it makes me so angry. And I think that the way we constantly discuss these people is that they're eating animals. They're eating our animals. They're savages. They're subhuman. And I think that is very frightening. And it goes to the last point, that, some people who don't even know what the problem is are scared of them because they've heard so much rhetoric from the likes of Donald Trump, and whether it's about Puerto Ricans or Mexicans or whatever it is. I mean, I'm Irish, so was Irish maybe 100 years ago, but it's despicable actually, and it's and everybody just seems to be leaning into it rather than saying, well, can we not just also think about humanity here, and also at the same time deal with, I'm not saying there isn't drug gangs and there aren't serious problems and that isn't a huge amount of numbers coming through, but dealing with it on the source and some basic humanity wouldn't go astray.
Thank you, Shona. Migration, a very difficult issue, not only for the United States, but also for Europe. Okay, a fantastic discussion. The very final question, 1 or 2 sentences. What will you be doing and where will you be on election? I guess for Jana, it'll be election night. For the rest of us, it'll be election night. For the rest of us, it'll be the entire night and early morning in Europe. So Hannelore, where will you be?
I think I'll try and get some sleep and wake up early in the morning, because you won't know anything, and we'll just see how it's going in the swing states to get a feel, and that won't be until, you know, like really early morning in Europe. So.
Okay, very good. Shona, how about you?
Yeah, we're doing our Euronews special from Brussels and DC, and we'll sort of starting work at 3 a.m. And we're going live at 6, and hopefully there might be some sort of indication, but that's what we'll be doing. Okay,
excellent. And Jana?
I'll be at the Mar-a-Lago or West Palm Beach or Palm Beach. They have a tent. Donald Trump's team has a special conference room for journalists, and that's where we're gonna be. If we don't get in, which he does tend to reject most international journalists, we'll be there with his fans around this area speaking to people.
Excellent. As for myself, this week I just found out the news. I've been invited to Cologne, Germany, where I'll be doing the all-night special with some other German journalists. We'll be reporting in the German language for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, starting at 1 in the morning and finishing up at around 10. And I hope we'll have a result, although I think it'll probably take a day or 2 before we have all the mail-in ballots from Pennsylvania and other places. Hannelore, Shona, and Jana, again, all of us here are Amerigo Journalist Awards. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time on a Friday evening. Thank you to our audience members as well. We really appreciate it. And of course, the ENAM, the European Network of American Alumni Associations, will be sending out more newsletters and more activities. And let's hope for a good, stable election and a peaceful transfer of power.
Yes, let's hope for that.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.